Welcome back to the deep dive. We often think about power, political power especially, in terms of, well, formal titles, right? President, prime minister, maybe CEO in the business world.
Yeah, the person with the official designation, the one who sits in the big chair.
Exactly. But what happens when some of the most, really transformative leaders, people who change the course of history or modern politics, what happens when they actively refuse the office? When they choose not to sit in that chair, yet somehow manage to wield this huge civilizational influence.
That's really the heart of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
That paradox is exactly what we're digging into today. And our sources, they kick off with a really, really fascinating modern case study. Prashant Kishor, or PK as he's widely known, in India.
Right, PK. This is a name that, for anyone following Indian politics, is synonymous with strategy.
Absolutely. We're talking about the man who basically designed landmark political victories across the board. He was, a primary architect behind Narendra Modi's huge national win in 2014.
And then, almost immediately after, he engineered Nitish Kumar's victory in Bihar in 2015, often seen as a major countermove.
Precisely. A strategist whose expertise, well, it's pretty much considered unparalleled in the Indian context. And yet this same person has quite dramatically walked away from all that, walked away from the mechanics of formal power.
And he's chosen instead to embark on this, well, incredibly grueling, totally non-electoral grassroots movement in one specific state, Bihar.
It's a massive undertaking. And that choice itself, as you said, it's not just a personal decision, it's a profound political statement, isn't it?
It really is. And it forces us, I think, to ask that bigger question. How do leaders actually initiate fundamental systemic change? Sometimes, even civilizational level change, when they're operating completely outside of the traditional political office, or in PK's case, actively rejecting it.
And to explore that, we've gathered quite a stack of material. We're looking closely at PK's contemporary strategy, this movement he calls Jan Swaraj, good governance by the people. And we're comparing it quite directly to two absolute giants of the 20th century, leaders whose methods, frankly, couldn't be more different from each other.
We're talking Mahatma Gandhi.
The titan of moral authority, yeah. The ultimate example of influence derived from conscience.
And Deng Xiaoping?
And Deng Xiaoping. The paramount architect of pragmatic state control in China, someone who wielded immense power, but often from behind the scenes.
So it's really a deep dive into the architecture of leadership itself. We're looking at the fundamental difference between, say, cultivating moral force, that Gandhi-style approach, and exercising pragmatic, results-driven power, more like Deng.
That's the core tension. Our mission today is to take these three, really vast and complex models, the modern strategist PK, the saint-like figure of Gandhi, and the ultimate realist Deng, and try to understand precisely how they managed to engineer these foundational shifts in their societies.
Without ever needing to sit on the throne, so to speak, without holding that top formal title.
Exactly. Do you aim to capture the state apparatus itself? Get your hands on the levers of power. Or do you try to capture the moral consciousness of the people? It's a fundamental choice.
And the answer to that question, it seems, really defines the success, or maybe the failure, of their entire approach. It dictates the path they take.
It really does. It shapes everything that follows.
Okay, let's unpack this then, this fundamental choice. Influence versus office. We're going to start right now with Prashant Kishor and what our sources are calling this masterstroke of strategic restraint. So the sources jump right in, identifying what they term the core paradox of Prashant Kishor. Here's a guy, as we said, with immense political capital, the strategic genius, really, to win almost any election he sets his sights on.
He's proven that time and again. His track record is undeniable.
Yet his decision, this very deliberate choice to completely avoid personally contesting elections in Bihar, it's not framed as him withdrawing from politics or, giving up. Instead, the sources label it a masterstroke of strategic restraint.
Yeah, and that framing is critical. It's absolutely central to understanding his current identity and the project he's undertaken. After years, literally years, spent engineering victories for others.
Right, putting other people into power.
Exactly. He seems to have reached this conclusion, this realization that winning office often ends up trapping the winner. You get caught inside the very bureaucratic tangles and political compromises that you were supposedly elected to fight against.
It's the classic dilemma of the reformer becoming part of the establishment.
Precisely. So his explicit philosophy now, as the sources state it, is to choose, and this is a direct quote, moral authority over formal power, influence over office, and people over position.
That's a powerful triad. Moral authority over power, influence over office, people over position. It flips the usual political calculus on its head, doesn't it?
Completely. We're so conditioned, especially in modern democracies, to see political legitimacy flowing downwards,
Hmm.
from the ballot box to the elected leader who then exercises power over the people.
That's the standard model.
But PK seems to be trying to fundamentally reverse that current. He's asserting that true, sustainable political power, the kind that actually leads to lasting change, must flow upwards from the people themselves.
And his refusal to accept any office, even if it were offered to him down the line, that becomes the sort of physical guarantee of that principle, doesn't it? It's his way of saying, I'm not in this for the chair.
It is. It's a constant, visible demonstration of his commitment to that idea. One of the documents we looked at actually describes this whole endeavor as a radical democratic experiment.
Radical is a strong word, but maybe accurate here.
I think it fits. He's essentially attempting to prove a hypothesis that a massive socio-political movement, which he's named Jan Suraj, meaning good governance by the people, can actually succeed.
Succeed in transforming a state.
Solely by focusing on three core pillars.
Yeah.
Decentralizing power down to local level, enforcing radical transparency through digitization, and fundamentally moralizing the political discourse itself.
And all of this, crucially, without ever needing to leverage the traditional tools, the state bureaucracy, ministerial positions, the formal levers of governmental power.
It's a huge gamble on the power of popular will and ethical appeal alone.
Okay, but this immediately raises a question, a kind of skepticism, which the sources also touch upon. Why is PK unique in this? I mean, we've had political strategists before, haven't we? Influential figures behind the scenes.
Sure.
Why can't we just compare him to, say, well-known Western strategists like James Carville, who was instrumental in Bill Clinton's campaign, or maybe David Axelrod for Obama? Aren't they similar figures?
That comparison comes up, but the sources argue pretty strongly that it's, well, wholly inadequate. It misses the scale and nature of what PK is attempting.
How so?
Because PK seems to have transcended the role of just a consultant or a strategist. A strategist typically draws the electoral map, figures out how to win the next election within the existing system.
Right, they work the current rules.
PK, on the other hand, appears to be trying to rebuild the entire foundation. He's aiming for constitutional and ethical shifts, rebuilding the state, as it were, from the ground up, starting with Bihar.
So it's not just about winning, it's about changing the game itself.
Exactly. The description that comes through in the material is of this unique blend. He's part strategist, yes, using those skills, but also part social reformer, aiming for deep societal change, and part Gandhian walker, embracing that model of direct physical connection with the people.
That's a fascinating combination, and it implies he's taking that tactical genius, the same thinking he used to install government's Modi in 2014, that stunning upset against the BJP in Bihar in 2015, helping Congress regain ground in places like Punjab and Andhra Pradesh.
Yeah, all those high-profile campaigns.
And now he's applying that same strategic mind not to winning elections for a party, but to this broader goal of socio-political reengineering, moving beyond just partisan gain.
That seems to be the core shift. He's repurposing his skill set for a different kind of objective.
So if he's deliberately sidestepping the traditional political machine, the parties, the campaigns, the elections, what is the actual mechanism for this Jan Siraj movement? How does it operate on the ground?
Well, he's chosen a method that, as you hinted earlier, seems almost anachronistic, doesn't it? Especially in our hyper-digital age. He's chosen the Pad Yatra.
The long march, literally walking.
Physical, absolutely grinding, thousands upon thousands of kilometers long walk across the length and breadth of Bihar.
And this isn't just a symbolic stroll. We're talking about a sustained, months-long, potentially years-long effort.
It's a monumental physical commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And the sources explicitly frame this as the 21st century equivalent of Mahatma Gandhi's Salt March. That historical parallel is absolutely intentional on PK's part.
So the connection to Gandhi is not just philosophical, it's methodological too.
Very much so. It's designed as a profoundly empathetic methodology. The core idea is to achieve a mass awakening, but one that's stitched together one conversation, one step at a time.
So direct face-to-face interaction.
Exactly. It's about talking directly to farmers in their fields, students in their villages, laborers at their workplaces, getting away from the mediated reality of politics.
And the sources contrast this very sharply, don't they, with the typical approach of the modern political class?
Oh, absolutely. The contrast is stark. It's positioned against what the sources describe as the political establishment's obsession with, quote, social media optics and TV studio debates.
The managed image versus the direct encounter.
Right. PK's Pad Yatra is presented as the antidote to that kind of detached, mediated politics. It's about physical presence, shared experience, and unscripted dialogue.
But let's talk logistics for a moment. I mean, walking thousands of kilometers day after day with a support staff, security, managing supplies, that requires massive organization, doesn't it? And significant resources.
It's a huge logistical challenge, no question.
How does he manage that complexity without the backing of a formal party structure or, state funding, which he's explicitly rejected? Where does the support come from?
This is where the model gets really interesting because it's not just a nostalgic return to Gandhian methods. It's actually a synthesis of tradition and, well, very modern technology.
Okay, how does that work?
The Pad Yatra isn't just a walk. It's described as a kind of living, moving data collection machine, while PK himself is engaging in those direct, empathetic conversations.
The stitching together part?
His team, which includes hundreds of trained volunteers accompanying him or working in parallel, they're using technology. Specifically, secure digital applications on tablets and phones.
To do what? Record the conversation?
To record real-time feedback, yeah. To systematically document grievances expressed by the people they meet. To gather detailed local political insights, mapping out power structures and key issues village by village. It's crowdsourcing political intelligence on an unprecedented scale.
Wow. So it's marrying that very personal, physical empathy of the walk with hard strategic data gathering.
Exactly that. The sources call it marrying technology with empathy, data with dharma, ethics, and ambition with humility. It's a fascinating blend.
And the funding. How is this massive operation sustained financially?
The sources indicate it's financed primarily through grassroots donations, small contributions from ordinary people within Bihar, and significantly contributions from the large Bihari diaspora, non-resident Indians, NRIs, and migrants working elsewhere in India or abroad who buy into this vision of regional revival for their home state.
So it's crowdfunding a political movement, essentially.
In large part, yes. And the very nature of the Pad Yatra, the act of walking itself, performs another function. It inherently prevents the kind of detached, armored car politics that often defines the ruling class.
You can't hide in an SUV when you're walking through villages.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It forces a kind of radical transparency and daily accountability onto the leader himself. He's physically present, accessible, vulnerable even. And the moral force generated by this visible physical sacrifice, this commitment, is described as undeniable. It creates a form of legitimacy that arguably no conventional election win, with all its compromises, could ever grant.
That's a powerful argument for the strategic restraint idea. The restraint creates the authority.
That seems to be the logic. The moral high ground is the strategic position.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly to the object of all this effort. The state of Bihar itself. The sources consistently refer to it as the sleeping giant of India. For listeners who might not be deeply familiar with Indian history or geography, why is Bihar so significant? And why is its current situation often described as, well, paradoxical given its past?
The historical and frankly emotional weight of Bihar in the Indian narrative is immense. It's often referred to almost reverently as the motherland of Indian civilization.
Motherland, why that term?
Because for centuries, this region was the absolute epicenter of ancient India's power and intellectual life. We're talking about the great Magadha Empire, which formed the core of the Maurya and Gupta dynasties empires that unified vast swaths of the subcontinent.
This is the land that gave rise to figures like Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka the Great, right? Rulers whose influence stretched far beyond India.
Exactly. Foundational figures in Indian history originated here. And intellectually and spiritually, Bihar was just unparalleled. It hosted Nalanda University.
Which wasn't just a local school, it was a global center of learning, wasn't it? Often called the Oxford of the ancient world.
Absolutely. It drew scholars, monks, and students from all across Asia, from China, Tibet, Korea, Central Asia. It was a beacon of knowledge for centuries. And then there's Bodh Gaya,
where Siddhartha Gautama attained enlightenment and became the Buddha.
The very birthplace of Buddhism as a world religion is in Bihar. So you have this incredible legacy, political unification, intellectual leadership, spiritual genesis. For a very long time, Bihar was the lodestar of the subcontinent.
But that's the ancient history. What happened? How did it become the sleeping giant?
That's the paradox. Over the past several decades, certainly since India's independence, that glory has profoundly faded. The sources point to a confluence of factors, deeply entrenched political instability, often marked by corruption and caste-based politics.
Issues that have plagued the state for a long time.
Yes. alongside severe, persistent poverty and, crucially, mass migration. Bihar has experienced a huge outflow of its population, particularly its most educated and enterprising citizens, seeking opportunities elsewhere in India or abroad.
So a brain drain, essentially, on a massive scale.
A massive brain drain, yes. And this continuous cycle of instability, poverty, and migration led to a deep erosion of confidence within the state, a pervasive feeling among many Biharis, as the sources describe it, that they are somehow destined to perpetually seek survival elsewhere, that their homeland offers no future.
That sounds like a deeply ingrained sense of pessimism.
It does, a loss of collective self-belief. However, the sources we looked at push back against this narrative of irreversible decline. They assert quite strongly that this decline is reversible.
They see potential for a turnaround.
Yes, and potentially a rapid one. There's a suggestion that Bihar is actually ready for a kind of renaissance, perhaps similar to the trajectory seen in neighboring Uttar Pradesh, where disciplined governance and focused development have started to yield significant results.
So the underlying potential is still there.
The potential in terms of its large population, its incredibly fertile land in the Ganges Basin, and what's described as its latent intellectual capital is seen as explosive. It's a giant that's sleeping, not dead.
Okay, so if the potential is there, how does PK propose to awaken it? This is where his strategy moves beyond the Gandhian walk, isn't it?
It is. And this is where the strategist part of his persona really comes to the fore, blending with the social reformer. He isn't proposing a traditional path of slow, incremental industrial development, the kind that might take decades to lift a state like Bihar.
What's the alternative, then?
He's proposing something much more audacious, what the sources call the 5G AI Bihar dream.
5G and AI. For Bihar, that sounds futuristic, almost science fiction for a state grappling with basic issues.
It does sound like a huge leap, and that's precisely the point. It's a deliberate attempt to leapfrog decades of misdevelopment, to bypass traditional stages of industrialization by leveraging cutting-edge digital infrastructure.
So using 21st century technology to overcome 20th century, or even older, structural disadvantages.
Exactly. This is where he aims for that ultimate synthesis of, as one source puts it, soil and silicon, bringing the potential of the digital age directly to bear on the challenges of a largely agrarian, underdeveloped state.
It still feels like an enormous leap of faith, marrying the, earthy simplicity of a Gandhian Pad Yatra with the abstract complexity of artificial intelligence and 5G networks. How does he bridge that gap?
Well, that inherent tension, that apparent contradiction, is perhaps the defining characteristic of his entire movement. And it's why the specifics of his vision, as outlined in the sources, are so crucial. It's not just vague techno-optimism.
Okay, what are the specifics?
The vision focuses on deploying these high-tech solutions to solve very specific, ancient structural problems, the kind of issues that have historically crippled Bihar's agriculture, finance, and human capital potential. The documents highlight 3 particularly ambitious, concrete examples to illustrate this soil and silicon approach.
All right, let's hear them. What's the first one?
The first example targets perhaps the most intractable problem in rural Bihar: land ownership and credit access. The proposal is truly radical, using satellite mapping for comprehensive land reform.
Satellite mapping. How would that work for land reform?
Think about the sheer logistical hurdle this addresses. For centuries, land disputes in Bihar have been endemic. Lack of clear, undisputed land titles is rampant, often due to outdated records, corruption, or complex inheritance patterns.
And this directly prevents farmers from using their land as collateral, right?
Exactly. It locks them out of the formal credit system. So the proposal is to use high-resolution satellite imagery, combined with geographic information systems, GIS technology, and potentially drone verification on the ground.
To create a definitive map.
To create an immediate, impartial, and fully digitized record of every single land plot in the state, its boundaries, its size, its current usage. This aims to overcome centuries of bureaucratic inertia, local power plays, and missing paperwork almost instantly.
So this isn't just about creating pretty maps for planning purposes. This is fundamentally about establishing clear, digitally verifiable property rights.
Precisely. It's using technology to create legal certainty where there was none. And the source notes that by accurately mapping the land and then issuing secure digital land titles based on this data, 2 critical things happen almost immediately.
Okay, what are they?
First, the number of land disputes should plummet, easing a massive burden on the local administration and the judicial system. Second, and perhaps even more transformatively, every farmer who receives a clear digital title suddenly possesses verifiable collateral.
Which makes them creditworthy in the eyes of banks.
Overnight. It transforms them, conceptually at least, from subsistence laborers trapped in informal debt cycles into potentially bankable entrepreneurs. This unlocks access to formal, collateral-based lending from banks and financial institutions.
Injecting potentially billions into the rural economy.
That's the idea. Without waiting for slow, often leaky government subsidy programs. It presented as a way to empower farmers directly through technology-enabled property rights.
That's a massive vision. What's the second example?
The second example shifts focus from internal reform to global integration. It centers on leveraging Bihar's greatest natural asset, its incredibly fertile soil.
Bihar lies in the Gangetic Plain, right? One of the most fertile regions on Earth.
Exactly. It has the potential to be a major agricultural powerhouse. But historically, despite the fertility, its output has remained largely limited to low-value staple crops for local consumption, mainly due to poor infrastructure, storage, and market access.
So a lot of potential wasted.
A huge amount.
Yeah.
The PK vision here is to stop thinking locally and start treating this agricultural wealth as a potential global commodity. The plan envisions developing specialized agricultural zones focusing on high-value products.
Things like fruits, vegetables, specialty grains.
Yes, things like Bihar's famous lychees and mangoes, but also specialized vegetables, organic grains, medicinal plants perhaps, and then, crucially, building the infrastructure to get these products to international markets quickly and efficiently.
How? What kind of infrastructure?
They talk specifically about utilizing India's rapidly expanding national rail network, particularly connecting to the major port city of Kolkata. The vision includes specialized refrigerated train services, reefer trains, that could transport fresh, high-value Bihari produce directly to export terminals.
To reach markets where they command higher prices.
Precisely. To get Bihar's fruits and vegetables onto shelves in high-value international markets like Dubai, Singapore, Southeast Asia, maybe even Europe, while they are still fresh. This reframes Bihar not just as a source of migrant labor, but as a critical potential hub in the global food supply chain, maximizing the economic value derived from its soil.
Again, hugely ambitious. Okay, what's the third specific example of this soil and silicon dream?
The third example tackles that issue of migration we discussed earlier. But instead of just trying to stop migration, it aims to flip the narrative, transforming the perceived liability of a large, underemployed youth population into a digital asset.
How can migration be flipped into an asset?
PK recognizes that Bihar, despite its poverty, actually has a massive reservoir of educated, or at least literate, young people who are currently vastly underemployed. The traditional path is for them to migrate physically to big cities like Mumbai or Delhi, often for low-level manual labor or clerical jobs.
Which represents a loss of human capital for Bihar itself.
A huge loss. The alternative vision, powered by the proposed 5G infrastructure, is to turn this human capital into a knowledge export economy.
So people stay in Bihar but work globally.
Exactly. Instead of Biharis physically leaving the state to find work, the vision is for them to serve the global market online, from their homes or local digital hubs in Bihar.
Doing what kind of work?
The examples given range widely. Bihari teachers providing online tutoring services globally, software developers working remotely for international companies, customer support centers based in Bihar, even traditional practitioners like yoga instructors offering online classes to a global audience.
So leveraging the internet to export services rather than people.
Precisely. It aims to keep the talent, the economic activity, and the tax revenue within Bihar while connecting its people to global opportunities. But of course, this entire vision is utterly dependent on one critical piece of infrastructure.
Reliable, high-speed internet access. The 5G part of the dream.
And not just access, but guaranteed, near-zero latency fiber optic connectivity, and, just as importantly, reliable, uninterrupted power supply. These are massive infrastructural prerequisites.
The kind of infrastructure investment that, well, traditionally requires strong centralized state action, doesn't it? Like Deng Xiaoping mandating the build-out in China.
Exactly. That's the inherent challenge. PK is trying to inspire that level of investment and governance commitment, not through direct state control, but through moral pressure, popular demand, and the persuasive power of his vision.
It really does sound less like a conventional political campaign and more like a detailed 5-year national transformation plan drafted outside of government.
That's very much how the sources portray it. It's explicitly described as a civilizational mission, one that consciously aims to go beyond politics as usual.
What does beyond politics mean in this context?
It means the goals are holistic.
Huh.
Yes, they involve political reform, decentralizing power, digitizing for transparency, moralizing the discourse. But the ultimate aim is framed as something deeper, something almost psychological,
Which is,
which is, according to the sources, to restore self-respect to a people long told they are destined to migrate for survival. It's about changing the collective mindset of Bihar, convincing people that a different future is possible and that they themselves hold the key.
so the technological vision serves a deeper purpose of restoring dignity and hope.
That seems to be the argument. The 5G AI dream isn't just about GDP growth, it's about proving to Biharis and to the rest of India that Bihar can lead again, that it can innovate, that it doesn't have to be defined by its past failures.
I have to pause here, though, and maybe play devil's advocate. Ask the skeptical question that the established political players in Bihar and Delhi must surely be asking.
Go ahead, it's a necessary question.
Is this whole Pad Yatra, this grueling walk, this embrace of Gandhian symbolism, is it genuinely a spiritual commitment, a modern homage to the Mahatma's principles, or is it perhaps simply the ultimate, most high-stakes form of political marketing, leveraging powerful historical optics and emotional resonance to achieve very modern, very strategic 21st century goals?
That is, I think, the essential critical tension at the heart of the entire project, and the sources don't shy away from it entirely.
It's hard to ignore, isn't it, given his background as a master strategist?
It is. On the one hand, as we discussed, the physical commitment is undeniable. The sheer effort, the endurance, the daily interaction, the transparency forced by the walk itself, it lends PK a significant degree of moral authority. It's genuinely hard to dismiss someone who spends months, years maybe, walking dusty roads and talking to ordinary citizens as just another cynical politician playing a game.
It feels authentic on that level.
It does carry that weight. On the other hand, let's be realistic. This is Prashant Kishor, arguably the premier political strategist in the country. It's inconceivable that this entire operation isn't meticulously planned. Every step taken, every village visited, every conversation held, you can be sure it's being analyzed, documented, and strategically deployed.
To maximize impact.
To maximize public awareness, to build momentum, and crucially, to exert immense pressure on the ruling political class in Bihar and perhaps even nationally. The data gathered isn't just for understanding, it's for leverage.
So the moral force generated by the walk is, in itself, the primary strategic instrument.
I think that's a fair way to put it. The means, the walk, the moral stance, become the primary weapon in achieving the end, socio-political transformation, by explicitly rejecting the traditional lure of office, by refusing to contest elections himself.
He creates a kind of moral vacuum.
Exactly. He creates a moral vacuum that the incumbent government, operating within the usual constraints of power politics, finds very difficult to fill or counter directly. He deliberately positions himself outside the fray, placing himself in the historical lineage of ethical reformers who focused on building movements, not governing institutions. People like Gandhi, of course, but also Jayaprakash Narayan, JP, another major figure who led a massive anti-corruption movement in the 1970s, also originating from Bihar.
So he's claiming that mantle of the outsider reformer.
He is. And by doing so, he shifts the dynamic. He's not asking Biharis to vote for him. He doesn't want their vote in the traditional sense. Instead, the message seems to be he's simply asking them to believe in themselves.
Shifting the responsibility back onto the people.
Precisely. Shifting the locus of power and the responsibility for change back to the local community, back to the grassroots. It's perhaps the ultimate expression of leadership without formal office. To convince people that they don't need him in power, they need to find the power within themselves. He's asking people to lead themselves, facilitated by his movement.
And that idea, asking people to lead themselves powered by moral authority rather than state position, that transitions us perfectly, doesn't it, to the original blueprint, the archetype for moral leadership operating entirely outside of formal power. Mahatma Gandhi.
Absolutely. PK's entire non-electoral model, the Pad Yatra, the emphasis on ethics and grassroots awakening, it's explicitly rooted in and constantly draws parallels to the Gandhian tradition.
And Gandhi remains, even today, decades after his death, the global gold standard for achieving monumental change through non-office influence, wouldn't you say?
Unquestionably. Think about it. He never held any formal state position in independent India. He wasn't the prime minister. He wasn't the president. Yet his moral authority, his influence, was arguably the single most powerful engine that drove the entire Indian freedom struggle.
He shaped the destiny of, what, 1/5 of humanity at the time?
At least. And his power wasn't derived from armies or laws or bureaucracy. It was derived purely from the perceived integrity of his conscience and the revolutionary philosophy underpinning his movement.
So let's ground ourselves a bit in the genesis of that unique moral architecture.
Yeah.
Where did it come from? We know him as Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, born October 2nd, 1869, in Porbandar, Gujarat, a coastal town in western India.
Right. And his early life was significant. He was deeply influenced, the sources note, by his mother Putlabai's deep piety. She followed a syncretic form of Hinduism with strong Jain influences.
Jainism, with its core principle of ahimsa, non-violence or non-harm. That seems crucial.
It's foundational. That deep-seated respect for ahimsa was instilled in him from a very young age. But he also received a Western education, didn't he?
He did. He went to London to study law, qualifying as a barrister from the Inner Temple, which means he was exposed to British legal traditions, concepts of liberty, individual rights, political theory.
So a blend of deep Indian spirituality
Uh-huh.
and Western legal training. An interesting combination.
But the real transformation, the crucible moment that forged the leader from the lawyer, that happened later, didn't it, in South Africa?
Yes, absolutely. His time in South Africa from 1893 to 1914 was the critical period. He went there initially as a young, fairly conventional, even timid lawyer on a temporary contract for an Indian firm.
And what happened there?
He was confronted head-on with raw, systemic racial discrimination practiced against the Indian community. The sources always highlight the famous incident.
Being thrown off the train.
Being forcibly ejected from a first-class train compartment reserved for whites only near Pietermaritzburg, despite holding a valid first-class ticket. That personal humiliation became a catalyst.
It wasn't just an insult, it was an awakening.
It seems to have galvanized him. It transformed his understanding of injustice from an abstract concept into a lived reality he couldn't ignore. And this experience led directly, over his years in South Africa, to the development of his unique philosophy and technique of resistance, Satyagraha.
Satyagraha. It's a term many people have heard, often translated as truth force or soul force. But for listeners trying to grasp its practical meaning, how did Gandhi apply it? What did it actually involve?
That's a key point. Satyagraha was much more than just passive resistance or simply enduring suffering. Gandhi conceived of it as active, disciplined, moral combat. It was a way of fighting injustice forcefully but without resorting to violence.
So, active but non-violent, how does that work?
It was predicated on a core belief. The satyagrahi, the person practicing it, must fight the unjust system or law, but crucially, without harboring hatred or ill will towards the oppressor, the person enforcing the law.
Separate the act from the actor.
In a sense, yes, the focus was on converting the opponent through reason and self-suffering, not coercing them through force. Practically, it demanded specific actions. Things like non-cooperation with oppressive laws, refusal to pay unjust taxes, boycotting institutions that perpetuated discrimination.
But always through discipline, nonviolence.
Always. And that discipline, that was absolutely key. The sources emphasize this repeatedly. Gandhi didn't just call for spontaneous protests. He instituted strict rules and rigorous training for anyone participating in his Satyagraha campaigns.
What kind of rules?
Before undertaking any major campaign, participants often had to take a formal vow. They'd swear to adhere to absolute nonviolence, ahimsa, in thought, word, and deed. They had to promise to respect property, to obey the internal discipline of the movement's leaders, and crucially, to willingly accept imprisonment, physical hardship, even injury, without any retaliation whatsoever.
So, if police used batons during a protest?
The instruction was clear. The Satyagrahis was to either stand their ground passively, offering no resistance, or even shield others with their body, but never, ever lift a finger in defense or anger.
That requires incredible self-control.
Immense self-control. And Gandhi believed that this disciplined voluntary suffering was the very source of the movement's moral power. It transformed a political confrontation into an ethical one. The nonviolent suffering of the protesters exposed the inherent violence and injustice of the oppressive system for the entire world to see.
It shifted the moral calculus of the conflict.
Exactly. And this unwavering focus on the means being as pure as the desired end, freedom, justice, that became the defining characteristic of his entire political philosophy. Violence, in his view, even if used for a good cause, would inevitably poison the outcome. It would corrupt the very freedom they were fighting for, regardless of who initiated it.
It's a demanding ethical standard for a political movement.
Extremely demanding. When he finally returned to India in 1915 after 2 decades in South Africa, he didn't immediately jump into national politics. He took the advice of his political mentor, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, and spent his first year traveling extensively across India.
Just observing.
Observing, listening, understanding. He witnessed firsthand the staggering scale of poverty, the deep social fractures caused by colonialism, and the debilitating effects of the caste system, particularly untouchability.
And this direct observation influenced his personal choices too, didn't it?
Profoundly. It led him to adopt a life of radical simplicity. He famously shed his Western attire and adopted the simple loincloth, dhoti, worn by the poorest peasants. He took up spinning his own cloth, khadi, daily. He lived in communal ashrams, sharing labor and resources.
Why was that simplicity so important politically?
Because it allowed him to physically and symbolically bridge the vast gulf that existed between the Western-educated urban elite who dominated the early nationalist movement and the illiterate, impoverished masses living in India's villages. His simple lifestyle made him relatable, trustworthy, one of them.
It gave him credibility with the common person.
Immense credibility. And his early campaigns back in India perfectly demonstrated this blend of addressing specific local grievances using his evolving Satyagraha technique. The Champaran Satyagraha in 1917, for instance.
So what was that about?
He went to the Champaran district in Bihar, actually, to investigate the plight of indigo farmers who were being ruthlessly exploited by British planters under an unjust system called Tinkethia.
And he used nonviolent methods.
Yes. He meticulously gathered testimonies, organized peaceful protests, faced down arrest threats with calm defiance, and ultimately forced the colonial authorities to investigate and eventually abolish the exploitative system. It was a major victory, a localized success story that proved the Satyagraha method could work against powerful vested economic and political interests, even within India.
It built momentum for his approach.
It did. But the truly iconic moment, the one that captured the imagination of India and the world, was undoubtedly the Salt March in 1930.
The Dandi March. Why salt?
The British colonial government had imposed a strict monopoly and levied a heavy tax on the production and sale of salt. Salt was and is an absolute daily necessity for everyone, especially the poor in India's hot climate.
So the tax hit everyone, but disproportionately the poorest.
Exactly. It became a powerful symbol of the economic injustice and the sheer arrogance of colonial rule. Gandhi decided to directly defy this law in a very public, very symbolic way.
By walking to the sea.
By leading a march, a 240-mile, about 390 kilometers walk, from his Sabarmati ashram near Ahmedabad to the small coastal village of Dandi on the Arabian Sea.
That's a long way to walk. How long did it take?
It took 24 days. He started with just a few dozen followers. But as they walked through villages, day after day, the numbers swelled into the thousands.
Just thinking about the logistics. Organizing food, water, shelter for thousands of people marching for almost a month, all without modern communication, without state support, likely with state opposition. It must have been staggering.
It was a logistical marvel, relying entirely on decentralized, community-based organization. Villages along the predetermined road took responsibility for providing sustenance and resting places for the marchers. It was a collective effort.
And the march itself was the message.
The march itself was a masterclass in political theater and moral communication. It was meticulously documented by journalists, both Indian and international, who followed along. Every step, every halt, every speech Gandhi gave along the way was designed to build pressure, raise awareness, and galvanize the nation.
And the climax at Dandi?
The climax was deceptively simple. Upon reaching the sea at Dandi, Gandhi simply walked down to the shore, bent down, and picked up a small lump of natural salt from the mudflats.
That was it. Just picking up salt.
That was the act of defiance. By making his own salt, however symbolically, he was directly breaking the British salt law. It was a profoundly simple act, yet incredibly powerful. It functionally stripped the British Empire of its moral legitimacy to enforce such an unjust law. It wasn't a violent uprising, it wasn't a complex legal challenge in court, it was a performance of ethical sovereignty.
And it triggered nationwide civil disobedience, right? People across India started making their own salt.
Exactly. It unleashed a massive wave of nonviolent civil disobedience across the country. Millions participated, leading to mass arrests, including Gandhi himself. But the moral victory was won. The Salt March severely undermined British authority and significantly boosted the movement for independence.
This really highlights how his vision went beyond just political freedom, doesn't it? This concept of Swaraj.
Yes. Swaraj was central to his thinking, and it was far more expansive than just achieving political independence from Britain.
What did it encompass?
For Gandhi, Swaraj meant freedom on two levels. Externally, yes, it meant self-governance, India ruling itself, but just as importantly, perhaps more so, it meant internal freedom, self-mastery, or self-rule at the individual level, controlling one's own desires, living ethically, taking responsibility.
So personal transformation was linked to national transformation.
Inextricably linked. And his vision for an independent India reflected this. He wasn't aiming to simply replace British rulers with Indian rulers within the same centralized, industrialized state structure inherited from the West.
What was his alternative model?
He envisioned a radically decentralized India, an India rooted in what he called village self-sufficiency, or Gram Swaraj. He idealized the village as the basic unit of society, capable of managing its own affairs, meeting its own essential needs locally.
So economic decentralization was key.
Absolutely. He was deeply skeptical of large-scale industrialization and centralized state power, whether foreign or indigenous. He believed it inevitably led to exploitation, alienation, environmental destruction, and a concentration of power that corrupted individuals and distanced leaders from the common person.
So his economic model wasn't about building big factories and chasing GDP growth through international trade.
Quite the opposite. His ideal was almost microeconomic. It was about empowering each village unit, thousands upon thousands of them, to achieve self-reliance in basic necessities like food, clothing, and shelter, promoting local crafts, local production for local consumption.
And this is where the charkha, the spinning wheel, comes in.
Exactly. The charkha became the ubiquitous symbol of his entire movement and economic philosophy.
Why spinning wheel?
For several reasons. First, it represented the dignity of manual labor, something he felt was lost in industrialized societies. Second, it was a practical tool for economic self-reliance. Spinning your own yarn and weaving your own cloth, khadi, meant Indians could boycott expensive imported British textiles, hitting the colonial economy directly. Third, it was a powerful unifying symbol that everyone, rich or poor, educated or illiterate, could participate in. It became a daily ritual of national identification and resistance.
It sounds like a complete counter-narrative to the direction the rest of the world was heading in the 20th century.
It absolutely was. And his focus wasn't just political or economic. He was intensely committed to social reform, seeing it as integral to achieving true Swaraj. Particularly his fight against the deeply entrenched injustice of untouchability within the Hindu caste system.
This was a radical stance at the time, wasn't it? Challenging centuries of social hierarchy.
Hugely radical and controversial, even within the nationalist movement. He launched a tireless campaign against untouchability, which he considered a stain on Hinduism and humanity. He undertook fasts, led temple entry movements, and controversially gave the oppressed groups the name Harijans.
Meaning children of God.
Yes, a term intended to uplift and integrate them, though it later became contested itself. But his intention was clear, to challenge the very notion of ritual impurity and hierarchy. He also championed women's empowerment, encouraging their active participation in the freedom struggle and advocating for their education and social rights. His vision was holistic, aiming for spiritual harmony and social justice alongside political freedom.
And his entire political style, how he conducted himself, seems rooted in this ethical framework. The sources describe him as a servant leader.
That term fits perfectly. His politics were fundamentally people-centered, not power-seeking in the conventional sense. He saw his role as awakening the moral consciousness of the people and the rulers, not capturing state machinery.
His power derived from his perceived moral purity.
Yes. His radical simplicity, the loincloth, the simple vegetarian diet, the vows of poverty and chastity, his reliance on truth and nonviolence as his only weapons. This wasn't just personal preference, it was his source of immense political strength. It transformed politics from a game of power into something akin to a spiritual practice, an ethical quest.
And his influence wasn't limited to India, was it? His methods had a global impact.
A profound global impact. The sources remind us, and it's well known, that his philosophy and blueprint for nonviolent resistance became a direct inspiration for major civil rights and liberation movements across the world in the 20th century.
Figures like Martin Luther King Jr. in the American Civil Rights Movement.
King explicitly studied and adapted Gandhi's methods of nonviolent direct action. Nelson Mandela, in his early anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, also drew inspiration, though the ANC later adopted armed struggle before Mandela returned to Gandhian principles of reconciliation post-release.
And others.
Figures like Cesar Chavez, who fought for the rights of farm workers in California using boycotts and fasts directly inspired by Gandhi, Lech Wałęsa in Poland, Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar. The list goes on. His model proved that moral force could be a potent weapon against even the most entrenched systems of oppression globally.
Even his death, his assassination in 1948 by a Hindu nationalist extremist who opposed his message of tolerance towards Muslims, even that tragic end seemed to reinforce his lifelong message, didn't it?
In a heartbreaking way, yes. His final act, reportedly raising his hands in a gesture of forgiveness or blessing toward his assassin, became a final testament to his unwavering commitment to ahimsa and compassion. Gandhi ultimately proved, perhaps more convincingly than anyone else in modern history, that the single most potent source of authority for a leader operating without formal office is the unwavering purity and power of their moral conviction. Okay, so if the first two models we've examined, Prashant Kishor's modern hybrid and Mahatma Gandhi's original blueprint, represent the pursuit of transformative change through moral force, ethical appeals, and decentralized people power, then we absolutely must turn to the ultimate counterpoint.
The other end of the spectrum.
Exactly. The leader who engineered perhaps the most dramatic national transformation of the 20th century, not through moral awakening, but through absolute centralized strategic state control and relentless pragmatism. This brings us inevitably to Deng Xiaoping, the architect of modern China.
And the contrast, as you say, is seismic. It's like shifting from black and white to color, or maybe vice versa, depending on your perspective. We move from the symbolism of the spinning wheel and the ideal of the self-sufficient village republic
to the hard realities of centralized authoritarian state planning, explicitly designed for rapid industrialization and achieving global economic dominance.
Deng's position itself is fascinatingly paradoxical, mirroring our theme of leadership without the top job. As the source material notes, he never actually held the highest formal titles in the Chinese state hierarchy. He was never president or premier of the state council.
No, he deliberately avoided those top state titles. Yet after Mao Zedong's death and a brief power struggle, by 1978, he was the universally acknowledged, undisputed paramount leader of China. His influence was unmatched, regardless of his formal position.
So his power wasn't based on his title, but on something else.
His power was fundamentally institutional and perhaps intellectual, rather than stemming from a formal mandate or charismatic mass appeal like Mao. He derived his authority from his deep networks within the Communist Party of China, CCP, his control over the military, the People's Liberation Army, PLA, and the sheer force of his ideas and will, especially among the party elite who had survived the chaos of the recent past.
Let's trace his journey briefly. Born in 1904 in Sichuan province, his early life wasn't one of privilege, but it was steeped in the revolutionary currents of the time.
Absolutely. He was part of that generation shaped by China's humiliations in the 19th and early 20th centuries. He went to France on a work-study program in the early 1920s, alongside other future Chinese leaders like Zhu Enlai. It was there he was exposed to Marxist ideas and joined the Communist Party.
And he was involved from the early days of the revolution.
Yes, he was a committed revolutionary, a veteran of the Long March, 1934-1935, serving directly under Mao Zedong as a political commissar. He rose through the ranks due to his organizational skills and loyalty. He held senior positions in the party and government after the communist victory in 1949.
He was seen as a capable administrator, right? Pragmatic even then.
Yes, he gained a reputation for efficiency and pragmatism, which sometimes put him at odds with Mao's more radical ideological campaigns, like the Great Leap Forward.
Which leads us to his experiences during the Cultural Revolution. He didn't just disagree with Mao, he became a prime target, didn't he?
He suffered immensely for his perceived pragmatism and his association with other leaders deemed too moderate. During the Cultural Revolution, that period of intense ideological fanaticism and social chaos from 1966 to 1976, Deng was twice purged from power.
Purged how? What did that entail?
He was publicly denounced, stripped of all his positions, and labeled a reviled capitalist roader, someone supposedly trying to restore capitalism in China. He was sent away from Beijing and forced to perform hard manual labor in a rural tractor factory.
And his family suffered too.
Severely. His son, Deng Pufang, was persecuted by Red Guards, attempted suicide by jumping from a building, and was left permanently paralyzed. These personal experiences of suffering, chaos, and the devastating economic stagnation caused by Mao's radical policies profoundly shaped Deng's worldview.
It must have taught him the catastrophic cost of ideological rigidity and personality cults.
That seems to be the key lesson he absorbed. It forged in him an absolute determination to prioritize stability order and practical results above all else, once he got the chance.
And that chance came after Mao's death in 1976.
Yes, there was a brief interregnum, the arrest of the radical Gang of Four, and then Deng skillfully navigated the complex power struggles within the party. By December 1978, at a pivotal party meeting, the third plenum of the 11th Central Committee, he had effectively consolidated power.
And again, he did this not by winning an election or claiming Mao's mantle directly, but how? How did he secure control without the top job?
He did it primarily through controlling the key levers of power within the unique structure of the Chinese system. He secured the loyalty of key factions within the party bureaucracy. He ensured he had ultimate authority over the military, becoming chairman of the Central Military Commission, a position often considered more powerful than the head of state.
And he used party structures cleverly.
Very cleverly. For instance, he was established and chaired the Central Advisory Commission, CAC. This body was composed mainly of aging, highly respected party veterans, the old guard, who commanded immense prestige and institutional memory.
Why was that important?
By leading the CACs, Deng could wield enormous, near-absolute authority from behind the scenes. These veterans were largely loyal to him and shared his desire for stability after the Cultural Revolution. Their backing allowed him to push through his reforms, ensuring they had institutional support from the most respected, sometimes most conservative segments of the party, effectively bypassing potential opposition from those holding formal administrative titles. He ruled through influence and control of the core apparatus.
Okay, so he secured power institutionally. What about his philosophy? How did he justify moving China away from Maoist orthodoxy? It's encapsulated in that famous maxim, isn't it?
It is, the quote that defines his entire approach. It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. Meaning ideology is secondary to practical results. For Deng, the ultimate test of any policy, the ultimate test of socialism itself, wasn't whether it adhered strictly to Marxist dogma or promoted class struggle. The only test that mattered was, does it work? Does it improve people's lives? Does it make China stronger? Does the cat catch the mice?
Pragmatism over purity.
Absolute pragmatism.
Yeah.
He famously insisted that China must seek truth from facts. Xi, an old Chinese saying he repurposed. If Marxist theory didn't align with the practical realities of China's situation and the need for development, then Marxism had to be adapted, not the other way around.
And this intellectual flexibility, this willingness to bend ideology, led to the foundational concept of his era.
Yes, the concept of socialism with Chinese characteristics. This phrase essentially gave the party the ideological cover it needed to introduce market mechanisms and capitalist techniques while maintaining its political monopoly. It allowed them to say, we are still socialist, but our socialism looks different because it's adapted to China's specific conditions.
It was a way to justify radical change without repudiating the party's legitimacy.
Precisely. And he immediately pivoted the entire nation's priorities. He decisively rejected Mao's obsession with perpetual revolution and class struggle, which he saw as disastrous. Instead, he laid out a clear, unwavering focus on economic development, modernization, stability, and growth.
And the national blueprint for achieving this was announced early on.
Yes, in 1978, he formally launched the program known as the Four Modernizations. This became the guiding framework for China's development for decades.
What were the 4 areas?
Agriculture, industry, national defense, and science and technology. These weren't necessarily new goals, they had been mentioned before, but under Deng, they became the absolute overriding national priority, pursued with relentless focus and cautious state-mandated changes that fundamentally restructured the Chinese economy and society.
Okay, let's dig into the specifics of these modernizations, because the details really show his pragmatic, step-by-step approach. Starting with agriculture, which was the most immediate need, right? Feeding 1 billion people.
Yes, agriculture was the first critical area tackled. China was still overwhelmingly rural and poor, and Mao's collectivized commune system had proven disastrously inefficient, contributing to famine.
So what did Deng do? Did he just privatize all the land?
No, and this is a crucial detail for understanding his cautious pragmatism. He didn't go for outright privatization, which would have been too ideologically explosive and potentially chaotic. Instead, he systematically dismantled the large, inefficient communes.
And replaced them with what?
He replaced them with what became known as the household responsibility system, Baokan Daohu.
How did that work?
Essentially, the collective land was still officially owned by the state or the collective, the village, but it was leased out to individual farming families on long-term contracts, often 15 years initially, later extended to 30 years or more.
Okay, so the state retained ultimate ownership and control, but the farmers gained day-to-day autonomy.
Exactly. And crucially, they gained powerful profit incentives. Under the system, families were obligated to provide a certain quota of their harvest, grain, cotton, etc., to the state at fixed prices.
But anything they produced above that quota.
Anything above the quota, they were allowed to keep for themselves, consume, or, most importantly, sell on newly permitted free markets at whatever price the market would bear.
So a direct link between effort and personal reward was created.
Instantly. And this sudden connection between hard work and personal gain unleashed a massive surge in farmer initiative and agricultural productivity. The sources consistently point out that this single, relatively simple, pragmatic change implemented top-down by the state was the primary driver responsible for lifting tens, maybe hundreds of millions of people out of deep rural poverty in the early 1980s. It was a stunning success.
A huge validation for his catching mice approach right at the start.
A massive validation. It built credibility for further reforms.
So after tackling agriculture, what was the next phase? Industry and markets? That must have been even more ideologically sensitive for a communist state.
Extremely sensitive. This was venturing into territory Mao would have condemned outright. But Deng proceeded, again, cautiously and experimentally. It was a controlled ideological gamble.
What were the key steps?
He began gradually restructuring the massive, inefficient, centrally planned state-owned enterprises, SOEs, that dominated Chinese industry. He started introducing market mechanisms, giving factory managers more autonomy, allowing them to respond to supply and demand to some extent, and even permitting some SOEs to fail if they were uncompetitive, a radical concept.
And private business? Was that allowed?
Yes, crucially, he allowed the emergence of small-scale private entrepreneurship, particularly in the service sector and light industry. People were allowed to start small family businesses, restaurants, repair shops, things that had been suppressed under Mao.
But the main engine for industrial change and opening up came through a specific policy tool, right?
Yes, the most famous and arguably most impactful initiative was the establishment of Special Economic Zones, or SEZs.
SEs, and Shenzhen is the most famous example near Hong Kong. What was the purpose of these zones?
They were essentially designated geographical areas, mostly located in coastal regions, for easy access to international trade, where the party could experiment with market-oriented economic policies and foreign investment without immediately applying them to the whole country.
So they were like controlled laboratories for capitalism.
That's exactly what they were, operating under the watchful eye and ultimate control of the Communist Party, but allowed much greater economic freedom.
What kind of freedom? What incentives were offered?
The state offered extremely attractive incentives within the SEZs to lure foreign companies, primarily from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and later the West. These included deep tax holidays, drastically relaxed labor regulations compared to the rest of China, simplified bureaucratic procedures for setting up businesses, and infrastructure support.
And it worked. Did the investment come?
It worked spectacularly. Shenzhen, which was just a small, sleepy fishing village bordering Hong Kong in 1980, was transformed within a decade into a booming metropolis, a global manufacturing hub packed with factories producing goods for export. It became the symbol of Deng's reforms.
So the SEZs proved that economic growth could explode, even under party rule, if the right conditions and incentives were provided.
Yes, they provided the proof of concept Deng needed to gradually expand market reforms to other parts of the country. It was his feeling the stones to cross the river approach in action experiment locally, verify results, then scale up nationally.
And the third modernization, science and technology, and the fourth, national defense, presumably followed similar pragmatic lines.
Yes. For science and technology, Deng understood that China couldn't modernize its economy or military without catching up scientifically and technologically after the isolation and anti-intellectualism of the Mao era.
So what did he do?
He took immediate steps to reverse the damage of the Cultural Revolution. He reopened universities and research institutes that had been closed or disrupted. He restored respect for intellectuals and scientists. And crucially, he made the pivotal decision to send thousands, eventually hundreds of thousands, of China's brightest students and scholars abroad.
To study in the West and Japan.
Primarily, yes. Specifically to acquire modern scientific knowledge, advanced technical skills, engineering expertise, and Western management techniques. The source material notes this was a remarkable gamble, sending the next generation to be educated by China's ideological rivals. But Deng prioritized the acquisition of knowledge and capability over ideological purity. He needed them to bring back the skills to modernize China.
That's a striking example of his pragmatism overriding dogma.
It really is. And for national defense, the modernization was aimed at creating a more professional, technologically capable military, moving away from Mao's emphasis on sheer numbers and revolutionary zeal towards modern equipment, training, and doctrine. Again, learning from foreign models where necessary.
The overall results of these four modernizations, driven by Deng's pragmatic vision, were just staggering, weren't they?
Absolutely unprecedented in human history, really. China rapidly integrated into the global economy, first as a manufacturing base, then moving up the value chain. It achieved decades of sustained, often double-digit annual GDP growth.
And the impact on poverty.
Transformative. Hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens were lifted out of absolute poverty. Living standards rose dramatically for a large portion of the population. China went from a poor, isolated agrarian society to a major global economic power within a single generation.
But this incredible economic success story was inextricably linked to Deng's particular style of governance, wasn't it? What the sources call authoritarian reformism.
Yes, the economic opening was never accompanied by a corresponding political opening. Deng was crystal clear on this. His guiding principle, born from his traumatic experiences in the Cultural Revolution, was stability above all. Wending Yado Yiki.
He genuinely believed that economic liberalization without absolute political stability, maintained by the firm grip of the Communist Party, would inevitably lead to chaos.
He was convinced of it. He believed it would unravel the country, destroy the party's authority, and ultimately undermine the very economic progress he was trying to achieve. He saw examples in other countries, like the Soviet Union under Gorbachev later, as cautionary tales of what happens when political reform outpaces economic stability.
So his style of rule reflected this priority.
Absolutely. He ruled firmly, often from behind the scenes as we discussed, using that cautious, experimental metaphor, crossing the river by feeling the stones. Moses shit to go ahead. Meaning, you proceed carefully, you take one step, feel for solid ground, i.e. assess the results and ensure stability is maintained, then take the next step. You don't leap blindly into the unknown. He moved incrementally, observing the effects of one reform like the household responsibility system or the first SEZs before implementing the next phase or expanding it geographically. And always, always ensuring the party maintained ultimate control over the political superstructure, the media, and the security apparatus.
This inherent tension between rapid economic change and rigid political control inevitably came to a head, didn't it, in 1989?
It did. The Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989 became the ultimate test of Deng's model. Growing calls for political reform, democracy, and action against corruption, fueled partly by the economic changes and exposure to outside ideas, culminated in massive student-led demonstrations in Beijing and other cities.
And Deng's response remains the most controversial aspect of his entire legacy.
Without a doubt, the sources are quite clear on his perspective, however brutal it seems. Deng, along with other party elders, viewed the sustained protests as an existential threat. They saw it as descending into the kind of chaos Lewin they feared most, potentially jeopardizing decades of hard-won economic progress and threatening the party's grip on power, and thus national unity.
So he made the decision to use force.
He authorized the military crackdown on June 4, 1989. He prioritized restoring order and stability over acceding to demands for political liberalization. From his deeply pragmatic, perhaps ruthless perspective, tragic as the loss of life was, this decision was deemed necessary to preserve the continuity of China's modernization path. He believed it saved the system from collapse and prevented a return to the chaos of the past.
It's a stark reminder of the authoritarian nature of his reformism. The stability above all principle had very real, very harsh consequences.
Absolutely. It defined the limits of his reforms. Economic freedom, yes, within limits. Political freedom, no.
After Tiananmen, there was a period of uncertainty, but Deng made one final major ideological push, didn't he? Solidifying his pragmatic realism.
Yes, in 1992, concerned that reforms might be stalling or reversing due to conservative backlash after Tiananmen, the aging Deng undertook his famous Southern tour, soon. He visited the booming SEZs like Shenzhen and Zhuhai.
And what was the message?
The message was unequivocal. The path of reform and opening up must continue, even accelerate. He forcefully pushed back against ideological conservatives who wanted to roll back market reforms. And it was during this tour that he most famously normalized and legitimized the concept of wealth creation within the socialist model.
This is where he moved definitively away from Mao's egalitarian ideals.
Completely. Deng explicitly stated that the goal of socialism was not equality and poverty, but achieving common prosperity through productivity. He argued that it was necessary for some people in some regions to get rich first so they could then help others catch up.
And this led to his final, powerful, and deeply realistic ideological slogan.
To get rich is glorious. Zifuguang wrong. This statement fundamentally redefined socialism for China. It explicitly linked personal economic aspiration and wealth accumulation with national pride and progress. It was the ultimate pragmatic justification. Getting rich wasn't bourgeois or counter-revolutionary anymore. It was patriotic. It was contributing to China's modernization.
He essentially proved, didn't he, that a Leninist state could embrace the mechanisms and dynamism of capitalism without surrendering the Communist Party's political control.
That was his unique and enduring achievement or formula, depending on your view. His authority, unlike Gandhi's moral force or PK's strategic restraint, was ultimately derived from delivering tangible results. And the result he delivered, undeniable, unprecedented economic transformation for China, became the primary source of the party's legitimacy for the next generation. So if we try to pull all these threads together now, connect this back to the bigger picture, what we have are three radically different blueprints, three distinct architectures for achieving foundational, even civilizational, change.
And crucially, all three leaders we've discussed, Gandhi, Deng, and PK, achieved their immense influence largely without holding the single top formal political office during their peak periods of impact.
Exactly. They operated outside or redefined that traditional locus of power. And the success, or at least the nature, of each of their models seems fundamentally rooted in the specific source of authority they chose to cultivate and wield.
Let's break that down. We started with Gandhi. His authority seems almost purely moral, doesn't it? Based entirely on his concept of Satyagraha, truth force, and embodied in his personal commitment to principled simplicity and nonviolence.
Yes, conscience was his capital. Then we have Prashant Kishor, the modern strategist attempting a kind of hybrid model. His authority, as we discussed, seems derived from a combination of factors: the deliberate strategic restraint in rejecting office, the tangible empathy generated by the physical Pad Yatra, and crucially, the detailed, technologically advanced economic vision he offers for Bihar's future. It's moral posture plus tangible plan.
Okay, moral and strategic visionary. And then the stark contrast, Deng Xiaoping. His authority wasn't moral or based on personal charisma in the Gandhian sense. It was fundamentally institutional and pragmatic, wasn't it?
Absolutely. His power stemmed from his control of the core levers of the party and the military elites. And that control was ultimately validated, legitimized in the eyes of many within China and even externally, only by the delivery of rapid, tangible, undeniable economic results. Performance legitimacy.
So moral conscience, strategic vision, institutional control backed by results. Three very different sources of power. Now, what about the mechanisms of change they employed? How did they actually try to implement their visions?
Here, too, the divergence is dramatic. Gandhi and PK, despite their differences in context and technology, fundamentally rely on a distinctly bottom-up strategy, wouldn't you say?
It seems so. Their mechanism involves mass mobilization, getting ordinary people involved. For Gandhi, it was through non-cooperation, civil disobedience, boycotts. For PK, it's through the Pad Yatra, direct dialogue, grassroots data collection, aiming for a kind of socio-political reengineering from the ground up.
Both are focused on awakening the collective consciousness, the self-respect of the people. They seek legitimacy and derive their power to influence change through popular participation and the perceived ethical purity of their movement and methods.
Okay, bottom up, people-powered, ethically focused. Deng.
Deng is the complete opposite. His mechanism was exclusively rigorously top-down. He used the existing centralized state apparatus controlled by the Communist Party to mandate change.
The four modernizations were decreed from above.
Precisely. He changed the rules of the system, first, reforming agriculture, setting up SEZs, opening to foreign investment. He fundamentally altered the institutional and economic landscape by fiat. Then, he essentially allowed the population to respond to the new economic incentives created by these top-down changes.
So, change the structure, and behavior will follow.
That was the logic. Stability and absolute state control were not just desirable. They were seen as necessary prerequisites for implementing these massive, complex reforms effectively and preventing societal chaos.
Let's compare their economic visions, too, because that really reflects their core values, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Gandhi's economic vision, encapsulated in Swaraj and Gram Swaraj, was fundamentally about decentralization. It idealized the self-sufficient village, promoted local production for local needs, and used the charkha, the spinning wheel, as its central symbol.
It emphasized dignity in labor, self-reliance, and was almost intentionally modest in scale, wasn't it? Designed to resist the perceived evils of centralized industrialism and consumerism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was an ethical, economic vision as much as a practical one. Deng's vision, on the other hand, couldn't have been more different. It was maximalist, centralized, and relentlessly focused on global integration and national power.
Foreign investment, export-oriented manufacturing, rapid industrialization, the development of massive cities and infrastructure projects.
All geared towards catching up with and eventually surpassing the West economically. And his ultimate justification was summed up in that phrase, "To get rich is glorious." Wealth creation wasn't just permitted, it was actively encouraged as a national goal.
So decentralization and ethical simplicity versus centralization and maximalist growth. Where does PK fit in this economic spectrum?
This is where his hybrid model becomes so fascinating and potentially problematic. He seems to be trying to synthesize these two diametrically opposed economic visions, or at least their underlying mechanisms.
How so?
Well, he utilizes Gandhi's method, the non-electoral stance, the emphasis on moral authority, the physically demanding grassroots Pad Yatra to connect with people and build legitimacy from the bottom up.
Right, the Gandhian means.
But his stated economic goal for Bihar seems thoroughly Deng-like in its ambition and technological focus. He's not talking about village self-sufficiency and spinning wheels. He's talking about rapid, large-scale technological acceleration.
The 5G AI dream, the satellite mapping for land titles, the refrigerated trains for global exports, the digital knowledge economy.
Exactly. These are visions of leapfrogging development aiming for Deng-style economic transformation and modernization just applied at a regional level for Bihar.
So he's attempting to achieve Deng-like outcomes using Gandhi-like processes.
That seems to be the core of his experiment.
Yeah.
He's trying to marry the spiritual humility and decentralized moral force of Gandhian movement with the kind high-tech, infrastructure-heavy, state-level modernization ambition that characterized Deng's China.
And this synthesis, this attempt to bridge these two seemingly incompatible approaches, brings us right back to that critical tension, that core question we need to explore for anyone trying to understand these models. Is PK's hybrid model inherently contradictory? Can it actually work in practice?
That is, I believe, the single most important question hanging over his entire Jan Swaraj movement, and it holds broader implications for leadership in the 21st century. Can decentralized moral authority, operating outside the state, actually drive the kind of complex, centralized, technologically sophisticated implementation required for his vision?
Let's take a specific example. Implementing a statewide satellite mapping system for land titles, ensuring its accuracy, integrating it with legal records, getting banks to accept these digital titles. That's not something a grassroots movement can just do on its own, is it?
No, absolutely not. That requires massive centralized state capital expenditure for the technology and expertise. It requires highly skilled bureaucratic coordination across multiple government departments, land revenue, IT, justice, finance, and requires significant political muscle to push past entrenched local interests, corrupt officials, or landowners who benefit from the current lack of clarity.
Similarly, guaranteeing reliable, high-speed 5G connectivity across a large, underdeveloped state like Bihar, or building the specialized rail infrastructure for refrigerated transport.
These are colossal infrastructure projects. They demand coherent, long-term state planning, huge public or public-private investment, and the power to acquire land, grant permits, and enforce contracts. That sounds exactly like the kind of situation where Deng Xiaoping's model, with its strong, centralized state stability and control, had a distinct advantage, doesn't it? He could mandate these things.
He could. Deng's system was built precisely to overcome bureaucratic inertia and local resistance to implement large-scale national projects. So the question for PK becomes, if he remains steadfastly outside formal office, maintaining his moral high ground, how does he actually compel the state apparatus to execute his ambitious technological plan?
Does he rely entirely on generating overwhelming public pressure, using the moral force of his movement to shame or persuade the sitting government, whichever party is empowered to adopt and faithfully implement his highly technical, expensive agenda?
That seems like a very indirect and perhaps precarious path to achieving such concrete infrastructural goals. What happens if the government resists or bungles the implementation or claims credit for successes?
These are the critical unanswered questions. The system Deng built bypassed this problem entirely by ensuring the visionary and the implementer were essentially fused within the party-state apparatus. PK is trying to achieve the vision from the outside, relying on influence rather than control.
So it really brings the trade-offs into sharp focus. The Gandhi-Kishore path, focusing on the means, promises ethical purity, grassroots participation, a restoration of dignity and self-respect. It aims to build change slowly, morally, from the ground up.
But it might struggle to deliver rapid, large-scale, technologically complex transformations.
Whereas the Deng path, focusing ruthlessly on the ends, demonstrably delivered staggering, rapid economic transformation and poverty reduction on an unprecedented scale.
But the price was steep. The sacrifice of immediate political freedoms, democratic accountability, and the potential for harsh repression when stability was deemed threatened.
So the lesson for the learner, for anyone thinking about leadership and change, especially in complex, developing contexts, lies in understanding this fundamental trade-off, doesn't it? What kind of change are you prioritizing, and what price are you or the society willing to pay?
Exactly. When you're dealing with a state like Bihar, described as a sleeping giant, mired in poverty and structural problems, which resource ultimately proves more valuable for igniting transformation? Is it the decentralized, self-respecting commitment of the people, awakened by a moral movement? Or is it the centralized, sometimes ruthless, power required to mandate modern infrastructure and overcome entrenched obstacles quickly?
It's the classic ends versus means dilemma played out on a massive scale.
It is. And interestingly, this brings us to one final theme that the source material touches upon, a surprising thread that seems to link all three of these very different leaders: the strategic use of political humility.
Humility, that seems counterintuitive for such powerful figures, especially maybe Deng. How does humility fit in?
Well, in each case, a certain form of humility, whether genuine or strategically projected, played a crucial role in consolidating their unique form of influence.
Okay, let's take PK first. How is humility strategic for him?
For PK, humility is manifested most obviously in his explicit rejection of seeking office or personal power. By positioning himself as someone merely facilitating a people's movement, by placing himself in that lineage of non-office holding reformers like Gandhi and Jayaprakash Narayan, he deflects accusations of personal ambition. His focus is framed as regional renaissance for Bihar, not grabbing national power for himself. That posture of humility is his strategic advantage, building trust and moral authority.
Okay, humility is self-abnegation for moral gain. What about Gandhi?
For Gandhi, humility was central to his entire being and his political method. His radical simplicity, the loincloth, the fasting, the identification with the poorest, wasn't just personal asceticism. It was a profound political statement. It was his source of power. By embodying humility, he became the moral standard against which the arrogance and injustice of the British Empire and even the Indian elite were judged. His humility was revolutionary, disarming, and deeply challenging to conventional power structures.
His strength came from his apparent lack of worldly ambition. And Deng, where's the humility in the paramount leader who authorized Tiananmen?
Deng's humility was of a very different, much more pragmatic and institutional kind. It wasn't necessarily personal humility, but a kind of systemic humility born from witnessing the disaster of Mao's unchecked power and personality cult.
How did that manifest?
Deng deliberately avoided creating a personal cult around himself in the way Mao had. He emphasized collective leadership within the party, even while holding ultimate power. Crucially, he took steps to institutionalize transitions of power, introducing term limits for key state offices, though not party ones initially, and grooming successors. His goal was to prevent the rise of another Mao, to ensure the stability and modernization path of the Communist Party, the system, would survive long after his own personal influence inevitably waned. His pragmatic humility was about safeguarding the party state, not necessarily his own soul.
So 3 different types of humility serving 3 different strategic ends. PK's moral positioning, Gandhi's ethical power, Deng's institutional stability.
Exactly. All three, in their profoundly different ways, understood a key principle: that supreme leadership, the kind that truly shapes societies, isn't always defined by the formal office one holds. It's defined by the strategic source of authority one cultivates and masters, whether that authority is moral, visionary, or grounded in pragmatic institutional control. They all managed to bypass, redefine, or utterly transform the traditional structures of political power to achieve missions on a truly civilizational scale. ###Astra.
So we've journeyed through these three remarkable yet vastly different models of leadership operating outside the conventional bounds of high office. We've seen the moral revolutionary in Mahatma Gandhi relying on truth, force, and simplicity.
We've examined the paramount pragmatist in Deng Xiaoping, wielding institutional control to deliver stunning economic results, stability being his watchword.
And we've explored the modern hybrid strategist in Prashant Kishor, attempting to fuse Gandhian means with Deng-like technological ends in his quest for a regional renaissance in Bihar.
All three figures, as we've discussed, found unique ways to bypass or fundamentally redefine traditional political power structures. They harness different sources of authority, moral, institutional, strategic, to pursue what they saw as essential civilizational missions.
Whether that mission was spiritual and national liberation for Gandhi, rapid economic modernization and national rejuvenation for Deng, or the ambitious awakening of a sleeping giant region for PK.
Prashant Kishor's vision, the one currently unfolding, hinges on this audacious belief. The technology, specifically things like 5G and AI, combined with rekindled moral authority and grassroots mobilization, can lift a region like Bihar out of decades of stagnation.
But this leaves us and leaves you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to grapple with, one that emerges directly from comparing these models. Is it truly possible, in the complex, interconnected world of the 21st century, for a leader or a movement to achieve Deng-like acceleration? Can they implement sophisticated state-level economic transformations like mandated 5G grids across vast territories or satellite mapping linked to formal credit systems?
Can these things be achieved purely through the power of decentralized moral movements, like those inspired by Gandhi? Does the very nature of modernizing a laggard state, dealing with entrenched interests and complex global supply chains, inherently require at least a dose of that pragmatic, centralized stability, perhaps even the authoritarian discipline that Deng Xiaoping championed?
Or, conversely, has the digital age created new possibilities? Can the 21st century offer a genuinely new hybrid path, where technological leapfrogging isn't mandated from the top down, but is instead fueled organically by the awakened self-respect and decentralized willpower of the people, mobilized through new forms of connection and moral leadership? What kind of leader, what kind of model can truly transform the 21st century state?
That's the question the ongoing experiment in Bihar and similar efforts elsewhere might eventually help answer.
And that is the question we leave you to ponder. That was the deep dive. We'll see you next time.